Michele Hanash. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair and distinguished committee members. I'm Michele Hanash, Director of Policy and Women's Programs at the AHA Foundation, a national survivor-founded nonprofit working to end harmful practices in the U.S. like child marriage, headquartered in Maryland, though I'm based in Florida, and we provide services across the U.S. We respond to help requests from across the nation, from those fleeing forced marriages, sadly including from minors, and it's because of these heartbreaking stories that we are here today. As you heard, child marriage is happening in Maine and at an alarming rate, and it's disproportionately harming our girls. And the vast majority of those entered into marriage were 17 years old. Those desperate help requests show us that marriage for a 17-year-old is not empowering. When child marriage goes wrong, which it's likely to, when a spouse becomes physically abusive, for instance, even if it were entered into willingly, it is difficult for a minor to exit due to their limited legal rights, not to mention the owner's practical barriers and power imbalances. The forced marriage of any person at any age is horrific, but the forced marriage of a minor, the state is complicit in that abuse, and that is egregious. We can't prevent all abuse, but we can prevent this one. And that is why it is so important to end all child marriage without exception and not create new loopholes to trap minors, for instance, by adding a military exception. And I would just like to take a moment to explain why adding a military exception in particular, to the marriage age would be horrendous public policy. I would like to point out that adding such an exception would be highly abnormal, as only one US state has a military exception, and it's antiquated legislation that's a half a century old. So first, child marriage in the military context is dangerous. We and our allies especially have worked with many individuals who are forced to marry as minors, to adult service members. And a minor who is a service member, who is being forced to marry a service member, needs and deserves as much protection as a minor who is a civilian or is being forced to marry a civilian. As you heard, child marriage is associated with the higher risks of DV, and that can be especially problematic in the military setting because it can be isolating, especially if the couple moves far from home or moves repeatedly, and that teen is deprived of their network of friends and families. So second, child marriage in the military context is unnecessary. A service member can designate anyone as the beneficiary of their life insurance and other death benefits, regardless of marital status, and service members' health and housing benefits extend to their children, regardless of service members' marital status. So for 17-year-old civilians who need health and housing, they deserve and they can get resources that do not require or encourage them to marry a service member for their benefits. And using a teen's current dependence to justify an early marriage sets them up for a lifetime of dependence. And you've already heard how that inflates their chance of domestic violence and keeps victims there. Even military advocacy groups have submitted strong letters of support to ask you to not use the military as an excuse to perpetuate child marriage, and we urge you to listen to them. The world is ending child marriage. It's time for us to as well. The US and 193 countries have agreed to do this by the year 2020 under the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because child marriage is recognized around the world as something that prevents gender equality. And there is, as you heard, a
Thank you for your testimony. The 3 minutes is up. Let's see if there are committee member questions.